It starts quietly, a sentence you can't unhear, a dream that clings to the day, a mirror glance that feels off. Then the spell breaks. The job title sounds like a costume. The habits that once soothed you now taste like ash. Even your opinions, those inherited certainties, stop matching your inner signal. A tale from old Alexandria. A copyist was paid to reproduce sacred texts, letter perfect. One night he dreamt the ink turned to smoke in his hands. He woke afraid, not of losing work, but of realizing he'd been living as a handwriting style. When the roll dissolved, he met the stranger underneath. The alchemists had a name for this. The first crack in the vessel. They didn't panic. They expected it. Because the work begins when your old identity contained what you were becoming. This is the finding your true self. It's harsher and freer. You become prima materia, raw, formless, honest. From that mess, a new self can be forged on purpose. In memories, dreams, reflections, Jung describes how the psyche doesn't argue with you in prose. It negotiates in symbols. When your outer life hardens into a mask, the unconscious sends emissaries. Recurring dreams, irrational aversions, sudden fatigue around certain people. Not as sabotage, more like an inner physician breaking a fever. The Hermetica frames it with a colder elegance. That which is below must be made fit to mirror that which is above. Translation. Your daily patterns must match the law of your deeper nature, or the mismatch will generate pressure until something gives. And when it gives, you feel what Heidegger called the groundlessness of being. Not merely fear, but the vertigo of realizing yourself was mostly assignments, roles, scripts, borrowed language. Gabriel Marcel would call this the shift from having an identity to being a question. The old initiates didn't treat this as a tragedy. They treated it as a threshold. The first operation is not improvement, it's disillusion. The persona cracks, and the raw material appears. Cravings, shadows, neglected gifts, unlived vows. If you can stay present here, without rushing to slap on a new label, you've entered the laboratory. Here's the terror. The ego thinks it's the architect. It believes your life is a house it designed. So when the foundation fractures, it calls it failure. But in Jung's language, the ego is more like a town mayor, important but not sovereign. The true organizing center is the self, the total psyche, including what you refuse to know. Alchemy encoded this with ruthless clarity. The texts speak of prima materia as something vile, mud, ash, refuse. The beginners assumed it meant dirty metals. The adepts hinted otherwise. The base matter is you, stripped of performance, your compulsions, your secret envy, your sweetness, your grief that never got a funeral, all of it unpainted. An old story from the desert monasteries. A novice begged for a rule to stop his anger. The elder placed a cracked clay cup in his hands and said, "Carry water." The cup leaked. The novice raged. The elder smiled. "Good. Now we can see where you break." The point was the water. It was the revelation of the fracture lines. This is why identity reconstruction begins with observation, not heroics. Before you change a habit, you must see what it protects. Before you rebuild, you must witness what your mask was paid to hide. The great work has a grammar. Traditional alchemy names 3 principles: sulfur, mercury, and salt. Read psychologically. They were not chemicals. They were forces inside you. Sulfur is the fire of intention, the part that says, enough. I will not live this loop again. Without sulfur, you only understand your problems. You don't leave them. Mercury is fluidity, the capacity to dissolve fixed meanings. It lets you question the story behind the habit. Not, I'm lazy, but I freeze when I'm evaluated. Not, I need this vice, but I can tolerate silence. Salt is structure, the discipline that crystallizes change into the nervous system. Without salt, you have revelations that evaporate by morning. But here's the occult twist. If you overfeed one principle, you deform. Sulfur without mercury becomes fanaticism, identity as crusade. Mercury without sulfur becomes drift, endless insight, no movement. Salt without either becomes ritual without soul. Productivity as a new prison. The Hermetic art is combination, knowing which inner element is missing in the moment. When you relapse, ask, did I lack sulfur, will, mercury, perspective, or salt, practice? This is where bad habits stop being moral failures. They become imbalanced alchemy, an experiment run with the wrong proportions. Now we descend. The first stage is the one most people avoid. Nigredo, the blackening. The alchemists drew it as rot, ashes, crows, tombs. Not because they were dramatic, but because the psyche experiences inner change as a kind of death. In practical terms, Nigredo is when your usual coping fails. The habit doesn't numb you like it used to. The praise doesn't land. The relationship script repeats until you can predict every line, and you hate yourself for speaking them anyway. Jung called this the confrontation with the shadow, everything you disown to become acceptable. The envy you buried under politeness, the hunger you renamed ambition, the anger you disguised as humor. Nigredo doesn't create these things. It reveals them. A small ancient parable. A city kept a sacred fire burning in the center of its temple. When invaders came, the priests hid the flame in a clay pot underground. Years later, when peace returned, they opened the pot, and the fire was gone. Only black soot remained. The elders wept, until one noticed the soot still held warmth. They learned the fire had moved into what looked like ruin. Nigredo teaches the same lesson. What feels like collapse may be the psyche relocating your power out of your persona. Don't decorate this stage. Contain it. Like the sealed alchemical vessel. Fewer performances, fewer distractions, more honest contact with what is actually there. If Nigredo is the fall, Albedo is the washing, the whitening. Not purity is moral cleanliness, but clarity. Separation of what is yours from what was installed. This is where Marcel's distinction matters. The old self-treated identity as something you have, a resume, a reputation, a bundle of traits. Albedo shifts you into being, lived presence, choice, relationship to your own depths. The work becomes investigative. You start asking sharper questions. Which desires are authentic and which are borrowed hunger? Which values are genuine and which are inherited commandments you never examined? In Being and Time, Heidegger would say you were moving from the they self into the possibility of your own most life. Albedo often arrives through practices that hold a mirror without flattery. Journaling, disciplined solitude, therapy, meditation, dream recording. In Jung's dream analysis, the dream is to fortune cookie. It's a compensatory message. It shows what your waking attitude refuses to see. Here's a method the old Hermetic schools loved. Write your most repeated habit at the top of a page. Then beneath it, list the benefits it secretly provides. Not excuses, benefits. Relief, control, distraction, revenge, safety. When you see the payoff, the spell weakens. The habit stops being mysterious and becomes a bargain you can renegotiate. But Albedo has a trap. The ego loves a clean new label. I'm spiritual now. I'm disciplined now. Beware the white peacock. Beautiful display, hollow substance. The second trap is subtler. Premature coagulation. You get insight and want to solidify it into identity immediately. The mind hates uncertainty, so it builds a new mask out of the very tools meant to free you. This is why Hermetic texts insist, dissolve completely before you coagulate. Otherwise, the old pattern contaminates the new. You don't rebuild, you repaint. So the question becomes surgical. What exactly is dissolving? Often it's not your life. Is your story about your life? Jung would say the psyche is withdrawing libido from outdated images. The energy that propped up the persona returns to the depths, and the ego feels empty. But emptiness here is not absence. It's reclaimed fuel. A little medieval anecdote. An apprentice saw his master destroy weeks of work by smashing a glass vessel. "Why break it?" he cried. The master replied, "Because it is faithful to the wrong form." That's the brutal mercy of Albedo. It keeps you from being loyal to a shape that no longer serves. Practically, this is where you begin a new discipline, disidentification. You watch thoughts without believing them. You feel emotions without obeying them. You notice cravings as weather, not commandments. Instead of, "I am anxious," you practice, "Anxiety is visiting." Instead of, "I am a procrastinator," you practice, "Avoidance is protecting something." This linguistic shift sounds small. It is the first crack in the hypnosis. Then comes the dawning phase the ancients called Citrinitas, the yellowing, the solar ignition. If Albedo is insight, Citrinitas is decision. You stop merely understanding your patterns and begin commanding your day. This is sulfur waking up, directed will. Not brute force, but disciplined flame. Campbell would call it the moment the hero returns from the underworld with a boon, and now must bring it into the village of ordinary life. The boon is to mystical knowledge. It's a new relationship to choice. You test your insights against reality. How you speak when you read tired, what you eat when no one watches, how you respond to disrespect, how you handle boredom. Citrinitas is where identity becomes behavioral architecture. The Hermetic schools had a rule: small acts, repeated with consciousness. Salt is built here. You don't defeat a habit by hating it. You replace its function with a cleaner ritual. If you doom scroll to avoid loneliness, build a 5-minute replacement. A walk, a voice note, a short prayer from the Tao Te Ching. Simple, repeatable, non-heroic. Lao Tzu's medicine is paradoxical. Do less, but do it with total presence. The soft overcomes the hard. The steady overcomes the rushed. Warning: Citrinitas inflates the ego. You will feel powerful and want to announce a new identity. I am transformed. Done. The work is deproved by declarations. It's proved by Tuesdays. Hold the solar fire, but keep Mercury nearby. Flexibility, humor, the ability to adjust without self-hatred. At this point, the psyche demands a deeper skill, active imagination. Jung's method for dialoguing with what lives beneath your plans. Because every bad habit has a guardian spirit, a function, a protector. If you attack it head-on, it fights back in the dark. So you negotiate. Close your eyes and picture the habit as a figure. Not metaphorically, literally. Give it form. A merchant? A drunk priest? A tired soldier? Ask it, "What do you do for me?" Then ask, What do you fear would happen if you disappeared? Listen, you were not seeking poetry. You were seeking leverage. Alchemy called this learning the language of the metals. Mercury doesn't respond to insults. It responds to precision. A story from a Renaissance workshop. An alchemist kept failing to separate impurities from a solution. In frustration, he cursed the substance. His mentor stopped him. You speak to it as if it were your enemy. It is your teacher. He made the apprentice sit and watch the liquid for hours until he noticed a subtle rhythm, warming, cooling, settling. The solution changed only when the apprentice stopped forcing and began cooperating. That's the Citrinitas posture, serious commitment, but without violence toward the self. This is also where you redesign your environment as if it were a temple. Remove cues that summon the old identity. Add cues that invite the new. The ego is not an angel. It is pattern recognition. If your room still looks like your old life, your nervous system will obey the old script. Now we arrive at the red door. Rubedo, the reddening, integration. This is T being fixed. It's the union of opposites into a living alloy. Strength with softness, discipline with mercy, clarity with mystery. Rubedo feels grounded, not euphoric, stable. You stop obsessing over who you are and begin acting from what you serve. In Campbell's terms, you return with the boon, and it becomes a life, not a story you tell at parties. The Hermetic emblem for Rubedo is the chemical wedding. King and queen, sun and moon. Psychologically, it's conscious and unconscious cooperating rather than competing. The persona becomes a tool, not a prison. You can play roles without being possessed by them. This is where bad habits lose their glamour. Not because you won, but because your inner economy changed. The energy that fed the compulsion is now used for creation. You don't need the vice as a counterfeit altar. But Rubedo has a secret. It requires incarnation, meaning your new identity must touch the body. Sleep, food, breath, posture. If your philosophy is radiant but your body is chaotic, the old self will return through the back door. So the work becomes simple again. Consistent practices, humble relationships, honest speech. Marcel would call it fidelity, not loyalty to an image, but loyalty to a lived commitment. Rubedo is when you can say quietly, without performance, this is who I am becoming, and your calendar agrees. Yet even Rubedo is to finish line. The old masters spoke of multiplication. The stone is strengthened by being used. Transformation is a spiral, not a ladder. You will meet the same themes again, at deeper levels with subtler disguises. This is why the real test of a rebuilt identity is not inspiration, but resilience under recurrence. When stress hits, do you revert to the old mask? Or do you recognize the trigger as an alchemical signal? The vessel is heating. Watch the reaction. Heidegger's phrase, being toward death, belongs here. Not as morbidity, but as clarity. Every identity is temporary. Every role will end. This doesn't make the work meaningless. It makes it urgent. You are not building a monument. You are crafting a way of being that can meet impermanence without collapsing into panic. An older Taoist story says, a man asked the sage how to become fearless. The sage replied, stop demanding permanence from what is moving. The man didn't understand until he watched a river flood. The banks that fought the water broke. The banks that curved survived. So in multiplication, you train for flex plus firmness, disciplined enough to hold direction, fluid enough to adapt. That combination is the true stone. Not a substance, but a capacity. And now, the shadow returns in new clothing. Spiritual pride, moral superiority. the identity of the one who has changed. Treat it like any other habit. Observe, decode its payoff, replace its function. There is a point, usually during Nigredo's deepest hour or right before Rubedo, when the work looks like a delusion. You touch the void, not poetic sadness, real existential frost. You realize there may be no final meaning, no cosmic certificate proving your life mattered. The old alchemists hid this terror inside cryptic Latin because saying it plainly can break weak hearts. All forms dissolve. This is where modern people run to distractions. Old habits feel like old friends. Cynicism offers a cheap shelter. Dogma offers borrowed certainty. But the Hermetic formula is merciless. Stay in the tension. Don't rush to meaning. Don't manufacture hope like plastic. Campbell called it the belly of the whale. The hero swallowed by darkness, where the previous identity dies. Jung called it the transcendent function. When opposites are held long enough, a third thing emerges. Symbol, insight, new orientation, without being forced. And Marcel gives you the rarest tool here, creative fidelity. The decision to keep making meaning without metaphysical guarantees, not self-deception, maturity. You commit because commitment is how meaning exists. So you practice a strange discipline. Act as if your life is a sacred experiment, even when you feel nothing sacred. You keep the smallest rituals. Making your bed, walking at sunrise, recording the dream, refusing the easy vice one more time. In alchemy, this is the moment the furnace is hottest and the gold is closest. When the despair doesn't kill you, it changes shape. The question mutates. You stop asking, "Who am I really?" as if a hidden label will solve the ache. You begin asking, "What am I willing to become?" That shift is everything. It's the move from identity as discovery to identity as creation. The Hermetica implies it. The human is a maker, a mediator between worlds. Heidegger implies it. Existence is not an object you possess. It's a project you enact. Jung implies it. The self is not an idea, it's a living directive, often felt as a pull toward wholeness. So here's the blueprint, spoken plainly. Name the old persona you were done serving. Identify the shadow payment, what you gain by staying small. Choose a new vow that is behavioral, not aesthetic. Build salt, a daily practice so simple you can negotiate with it. Consult the dream. Track symbols like weather reports from below. And because your audience wants tools, not fog, use a 3-question nightly audit. Where did I act from the old mask today? What was I avoiding feeling? What is one small act tomorrow that proves the new identity is real? Lao Tzu would approve. The way is made by walking it. This is how bad habits die. Not by force, but by being outgrown. Let's make it concrete with one last old-world vignette. In a coastal town, a bellmaker was famous for a single tone. Pure, unmistakable. When age bent his hands, he panicked. Without the bell, who was he? He tried teaching apprentices, but their work sounded like imitation. One night, he walked to the foundry and did something scandalous. He melted his own masterpiece. The town thought he'd gone mad, but he was destroying the bell. He was destroying the identity that depended on it. In the molten metal, he saw what alchemists always saw. Form is temporary. Essence is not a thing. It's a capacity. The next bell he poured was tight louder. It was humbler and strangely alive. He stopped being the bell maker who must perform and became the craftsman who participates. That's Rubedo in human language. You don't cling to the product. You embody the process. And the daily life application is brutal and beautiful. Build an identity around practice, not outcome. I am the one who trains. I am the one who tells the truth. I am the one who keeps the vow. Outcomes fluctuate. Practice composes you. So if your bad habit is a doorway, ask what it was trying to give you. Comfort, power, numbness, belonging. Then create a cleaner doorway that delivers the same need without the poison. This is the alchemist's blueprint. Not self-hatred, but self-engineering. Guided by symbols, disciplined by salt, ignited by sulfur, kept flexible by mercury. And here is the final secret. The old texts hide in plain sight. The gold was never in the crucible. The gold is the one who can endure transformation without fleeing into masks. The one who can dissolve a false life and still keep breathing. The one who can look at a craving like a symbol, not a command. The one who can meet emptiness and choose meaning anyway. When you rebuild your identity from scratch, you don't become perfect. You become coherent. Your habits stop being random. They become aligned. Your relationships stop being transactions for validation. They become meetings. Your work stops being a costume. It becomes an offering. Jung would call this symbolic life. Seeing your days as myth in motion, not fantasy, but pattern. Campbell would call it the return. You live the lesson, not just understand it. Marcel would call it fidelity. You keep your vow in the dark. Heidegger would call it authenticity. Owning your finite existence without hiding in the they. Lao Tzu would call it the way. Steady, quiet, unstoppable. So the invitation is simple and ruthless. Let the old identity die cleanly. Refuse the cheap replacements. Work the elements: will, flexibility, discipline. Listen to the dream language and commit to the small practices that make the new self real. Because the vessel will crack again someday. And when it does, you won't panic. You will recognize the sound. It's the work calling you forward.